Kick the Can from The Great New Deal, a not-quite fictional preview of future history, written by Mark Tredesom, narrated by David DeBerg. Hannah De Victor, a senior research fellow at the Hooser Institute, a conservative libertarian public policy think tank, was at her home in Amarillo, Texas. Before joining the Army, Hannah attended college with a guy named Chester Arthur. As a kid, he took some ribbing about that, though not many kids recognized that he bore the name of the 21st President of the United States. So he took on the nickname of Chip, and that's how she knew him. From time to time, Chip would provide her an anonymous tip about something brewing in the Capitol, and she'd investigate it for the Hooser Institute. But she hadn't heard from him since the Great Surprise, and guessed he was probably a casualty of that day's events. So Hannah was surprised when she received a message through USA1 FBCN messaging feature from someone using the handle Mr. Chipster. That was her private nickname for him in college, and she thought it was something that nobody other than Chip would know. The message came with a PDF document attachment, which she opened and studied. It seemed credible and authentic, but she was anxious. Could it be a setup? If she tried to share it, would her home be invaded by heavily armed federal police dressed in black, or would the PSFC cancel her online access forever? She didn't want to endanger her friends or family with this document. It might be too toxic to handle. The attachment purported to be a draft of the minutes from a United Congress Executive Committee meeting just 3 days ago. The document header said draft and confidential, not for public. The document read, Minutes of the UC Executive Committee, in continuing session. The committee chair led the members in the recital of the committee mantra, Never let a crisis go to waste. The committee chair instructed the members, The subjects of this meeting are very sensitive. The president urgently requested that we hold this meeting in order to address the crisis that threatens the survival of this nation and its government. 1 week from today, the president will issue a declaration of a national existential crisis. It is her request and my expectation that she will simultaneously announce to the public that the United Congress has evaluated the situation, has passed legislation that will resolve the crisis, and that she has signed the legislation. The President and I have agreed that this legislation will be called the Great New Deal. You will be pleased to know that focus group studies and surveys indicate a high degree of support for the legislation bearing that name, even though no such legislation actually exists at this time. A few days ago, I contacted the chairs of the various committees of the United Congress. I gave each of them specific subjects to address. They are now going to make their reports to this executive committee. The Executive Committee will present the draft legislation to a closed session of the full United Congress in 5 days. The United Congress will vote immediately, and I expect we will have not less than 90% voting in favor of the Great New Deal. All of this must be kept completely confidential until the President makes the declaration of a national existential crisis. Are there any questions? The UC member from Maine asked, "What existential crisis are we addressing?" The committee chair responded, "The Federal Reserve and our good friends in the Wall Street banking community have told us that the jig is up. They say we are not able to pay our bills. If we don't act immediately, our debt will be rated triple Z, way below the very worst junk bonds, and we won't be able to borrow from anyone. They say we have 10 days to resolve this, or else. No more deficit spending. Essentially, they are threatening to close our national checking account and break our ink pen. I know all these guys, and they are definitely not kidding." The UC member from Maine spoke again. "That's not fair. What do they want us to do?" The committee chair spoke. "They want us to do what they'd force upon a troubled corporation. They want us to cut costs, increase revenues, sell off assets, and restructure our debt. This will be painful, but we don't have any choice. At the same time, we need to be very careful not to worry the public. Our control over the news media and internet will help accomplish this, but everyone in the government must handle this with great discretion, because our very lives and careers depend on this. We don't want people to worry that we are going to take something away from them or that we are going to increase the tax burden on them, even if that is a reality. We won't highlight the national existential crisis or the Great New Deal as being money-related. Instead, we will emphasize other objectives of the Great New Deal, like world peace, fairness, and following the pathway of science. Going forward, we won't publish the federal budget or other financial information. Nobody really understands it, and it's doubtful that anyone will ask for it. Access to that information will now require an acceptable need to know. Also, we need to find things that would distract the public from what we're doing and keep the public focused on those things." The committee chair phoned the sergeant-at-arms and requested that the chair of the UC World Peace Committee now join the Executive Committee session. The chair of the World Peace Committee, who also was Secretary of World Peace, covering the former Departments of Defense and State, entered the room and reported, "Our first priority is to provide stability and equality in the Middle East, and we can generate cash by doing it. In the Middle East, only Israel has nuclear weapons, which makes neighboring countries nervous. Some nations have done research toward developing their own weapons, with the risk that such devices might be of poor quality and could result in an accidental detonation or environmental disaster. Committee staff and I have discussed this with representatives of Iran and Saudi Arabia. The solution to this problem will also benefit the United States Treasury. The World Peace Committee recommends that the United States sell 100 nuclear devices each to Iran and Saudi Arabia, not the big hydrogen fusion bombs, just the regular fission bombs, including the associated control and launch hardware. I believe they would pay a total of over $500 billion. The UC member from Texas asked, "Aren't you concerned they might use these weapons against us? And what does Israel think about this?" The World Peace Committee chair answered, "We have drafted a non-aggression pact that each purchasing country must sign, where they will promise not to use nuclear weapons against the U.S. and vice versa. They also will promise to be very careful with these devices, keep them in secure secret locations, and never sell or transfer them to any other party. We have not spoken with the Israelis. Our focus has been on world peace and American financial needs. Surely Israel will understand the importance of nuclear equity in the Middle East." The UC member from Minnesota said, "As long as what happens in the Middle East stays in the Middle East, I'm in favor of this idea." We have too darn many nuclear weapons in our arsenal. The committee chair said, "This is a good start. We should explore whether other nations might have a similar interest in making purchases. A more equitable worldwide distribution of nuclear devices could bring about true world peace in our time and provide immediate funding for our much-needed programs here at home. Be sure you deliver your written plan and financial computations to the Executive Committee staff tonight. I think we can move on to the Treasury Committee chair now." The Treasury Committee chair's report began, "Even with all the cost-cutting and new revenues, the federal government will still need to borrow, particularly as we have existing obligations to pay debt interest and principal. Our committee staff and Treasury Department experts have developed a new federal borrowing instrument that we call LZBs, which stands for Long-Term Zero BOGO Notes. These will be the only U.S. government debt instrument issued from now on. These are 20-year promissory notes issued by the Treasury with the full strength and backing of the U.S. government. The program is inspired by the U.S. Savings Bond Program that began on February 1, 1935, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the enabling legislation. LZBs will not have any interest payments during their term, so they will be sold in auction at a discount. Based on current financial markets, we estimate a $100,000 note would be sold at auction for about $55,000, perhaps less. At the end of the note term, the Treasury can elect to not redeem the LZB for cash, but instead require that the buyer accept a second 20-year LZB. The Treasury will decide which LZB holders, if any, get cash and which get more LZBs. The UC member from Vermont interrupted. "This math is hard for me to follow. Will you please demonstrate this with an example?" "Of course," replied the Treasury Committee chair. "Let's suppose that our current 55% auction price estimate is correct. Then it would go like this. At the start of year 1, the investor buys a $100,000 LZB from the Treasury Department for $55,000. At the end of year 20, the Treasury Department can elect to pay $100,000 cash to the investor, or it can invoke the BOGO provision and not pay the cash, but instead issue the investor two $100,000 LZBs, payable at the end of year 40. At the end of year 40, the Treasury Department can opt to pay $200,000 cash to the investor, or it can again invoke the BOGO provision and not pay the cash, but instead issue the investor four $100,000 LZBs, payable at the end of year 60, and so on in year 60, 80, and beyond. Investors who own LZBs will be permitted to sell them in the secondary markets, but would not be able to cash them in early. When our current outstanding federal debt comes due, we will require the holders of those instruments to accept payment in the form of LZBs. If anyone resists this, the Securities Enforcement Commission will intercede on behalf of the Treasury. We will require all corporate, union, government, and individual retirement plans to include LZBs among their investments. We can use them as payment when we purchase a business for nationalization. The Treasury Committee and Treasury Department believe the LZB debt program will greatly reduce government cash outflows for debt service and should be adopted as part of the Great New Deal, just as the original Savings Bond program was rooted in the original New Deal. Hannah thought the LZB program and the Hydol budget data plan would take Kick the Can to new heights. Kick the can into orbit. Nobody would see the growing problem while it was in orbit. But when the law of financial gravity eventually asserted itself, Hannah predicted the now gigantic can would crash to Earth like an asteroid, creating an immense economic crater. She finished reading the minutes. The committee chair said, "This is excellent work. I expect all of the Treasury Committee's recommendations will be included in the Great New Deal. It has been a productive day. I think we should adjourn now." The meeting concluded with a second recital of the committee mantra. That was the end of the purported minutes. Hannah wished this document was a hoax, but she suspected it was genuine. Earlier today, Hannah heard a radio news broadcast state the president would be making a live major announcement for television, radio, and the internet. Perhaps that will be the Great New Deal announcement? Hannah thought she'd watch the television broadcast of the president's address and look for clues regarding the accuracy and authenticity of the document from the chipster. She hoped Chip was okay.